Thanks, Tim. So, my name's Kristian Brock. I'm a trial statistician at the University of Birmingham. I work with Tim. So, it's my job to basically run clinical trials, report on clinical trials, I write about clinical trials, so they really are my life. And one of the aspects of working there is that I occasionally get to design clinical trials and send those designs to funding bodies for them to basically see that what we're doing is sound, and so they'll ultimately give us money to run trials. And that's actually how I met Tim 2 years ago now. It really has flown by. But I was introduced to Tim, and he said, he described to me the idea for the trial. Well, first he had to describe to me what Wolfram syndrome was, because of course I'd never heard of it, because it's so rare. But off of that meeting, we put together an application and put it into the MRC, so that's the Medical Research Council we have here in the UK that funds the majority of research in the sector. And they got back to us and they said, we really like the principle of what you're putting together here, and we really like that you're looking into this neglected area of medicine, but we want you to get right to the bit that matters. We want you to tell we want you to tell us whether this treatment works. So please move straight to what's called an efficacy study, a type of study where we check whether a medicine actually does do the things that we hope it will do. Because at the minute we just have hopes, we don't have any data, any evidence at all really. And off of their encouragement, we put together a revised application, much more in depth, much more money, a much longer study, and that's the study that we're now running that we're calling TREAT Wolfram, that Tim said has been funded to the tune of £2 million. So what it seeks to do is to categorically measure whether or not giving this treatment to Wolfram patients will slow down the progression of the disease and the symptoms. Now, the design that we've hit upon, and the design they encouraged us to use for the clinical trial, is what's called, as Tim's mentioned, a randomised controlled trial. So there are just two words there that it's worth me pulling out and elaborating on a little bit more. So controlled means that there are multiple treatments on offer, and some people get treatment 1 and some people get treatment 2. Randomised means that the treatments that are given to certain people is allocated randomly. Now, the really beautiful thing of when those two things are combined, something quite powerful happens, something very rare in medicine and in science research in general. When you couple those two features, having a control group and randomising between the two, it actually lets you, after you've collected the outcomes and analysed them, to basically infer that the differences in the outcomes that are observed were caused because of the intervention, the difference in the interventions at the start. So it's what you would call a causative analysis. It lets you basically say, this leads to this, and that's exactly what we need to do in every setting when we approve any kind of medicine, so that it's given to the wider audience beyond the clinical trial. So really this trial stands to be the gatekeeper, if you like, of the evidence, our one shot to really demonstrate, does this do the job or not? Now, that's not the only type of trial that exists, and there are certain other types of trials that you could call like single arm or non-randomised studies, whereby everybody just gets a thing and then outcomes are collected. And what I really wanted to do, well basically the EMA told us we wouldn't be going down that route because that's not the method by which drugs are approved, and we agree with them. But really to sort of convey why the types of difficulties that researchers have got into when they've gone down that route, I just want to talk through one example from the 90s. So the history of medicine is actually replete, sadly enough, with these types of examples whereby people have done experiments, made inference on the data they've collected, and they've been fooled by the data, but they haven't known that they were being fooled by the data. They've ended up giving faulty advice, and that actually can happen quite easily when you don't take this randomised controlled route. So, for example, as a brief aside, so in the 90s it was observed that the risks of heart attacks increased in postmenopausal women, and it was hypothesised that maybe this was related to hormones, and maybe if it was related to hormones, maybe the effect could be addressed with ultimately hormone replacement therapy. Now, there were single-arm studies done on this idea and case studies, so I'm talking about non-randomised evidence, and indeed it was observed that people who had this type of therapy did seem to have fewer heart attacks, so that was seen as a great thing. And that meant that the sort of intervention was adopted more widely, with the intention of reducing the number of heart attacks. Now, I've said this was collected from non-randomised evidence. What it actually turns out, or what's hypothesised to have happened now, looking back in the rearview mirror, is that maybe those people who went into those single-arm studies just happened to be slightly more health conscious or healthy, and what they sort of ended up artificially making it look like this treatment did something beneficial. So later on, somebody had the smart idea or the diligent idea of checking, well, let's just have a randomized study to check this actually does happen. And when they conducted a randomized study of hormone replacement therapy with respect to reducing heart attacks, everyone was mortified when they finally got the results, because it actually demonstrated the risk wasn't reduced, it was actually increased. So it was actually doing the opposite of what they'd imagined. Not only that, there was also some information, the data that suggested that the incidences of certain types of cancers were increased. So, this was like quite an alarming finding, and it really drilled home the types of, like I said before, the types of faulty inference that can happen if you don't have high quality evidence. And really, clinical trials stand to provide the most high quality evidence possible so we can categorically make, or at least maximise our chances of making the correct decisions about interventions. There's one other thing I wanted to talk about as well, and that's really to stress that clinical trials, it's tempting to think of them, or I think it's just human nature to think of clinical trials as being tests of things that are going to help us and fix us and get rid of disease and symptoms and suffering. Now, I can completely see why we do that, I do it too, but every single drug in every single disease area has two elements to it. And there's the bit that you want to happen, and that's the therapeutic effect that we're looking for. But the flip side is always there, and that is that every drug reasonably carries with it what we call adverse events or side effects, you might think of them as. So they do tend to, you can take a drug and it might address this thing over here, but then you might find out that in giving this drug, it also sort of messes with something over here as well. And there's the bit you want and there's the bit that you don't want. So really, I wanted to, it behoves me to stress that through the clinical trial, this is going to be an opportunity for us to measure whether the drug provides any therapeutic benefit at all. We hypothesize that it does, but this is our way to prove it. But also to attribute any of these adverse events and these side effects that might be attributable to the drug. So, sodium valproate is not like water. It's not a completely benevolent treatment. It's given to lots of people, including children, but there are side effects associated with it. And it might well be that the side effect profile seen in Wolfram patients is slightly different. So again, the randomized study, so in addition to saying whether or not it works or not, with respect to the control group, this will be our opportunity to spot whether it leads to any sort of complications that we really need to know about before we go about trying to roll it out as a wider treatment to the general population. Now, I appreciate that lots of that must be hard to sort of take in. There's quite a lot of jargon in the way I speak. That's just because I'm a scientist. But I'm going to be here all day and at the dinner this evening, and I'll be happy to have, to sort of elaborate on all these things with you on a personal level. But that's really all I have to say for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much.